welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you.
It's more than 30 years since you wrote The Wall. You're still touring with it. It was born out of pain and anger. I wonder if you still feel the pain and the anger.
The feelings involved, I mean, feelings come up from time to time as one goes through life, obviously, but my feelings at 70 are different than my feelings were at 30-odd.
Does that make it harder to actually put the show together and do it with feeling?
No. What happened was there was a very long hiatus between the shows that happened in 79, 80 and 81 and when we started touring again, which was in September 2010. So I started to work on a new production sort of in October, November 2009. And when I started, in my mind, I thought I can only really do this if I reinvent the show to suit who I am now. I.e., the show back in 1979 was very much the product, as you say, of an angry, almost but not quite middle-aged man, who'd been through problems with relationships and women. But there is some political content. But I was determined now to focus much more on the politics and much less on the personal narrative, which is what we did. And we spent many months, nearly 10 months, preparing all the visuals and the way the show would work.
And I want to talk about the politics and the way you as an artist weave the politics into the show in a minute. But for those people watching who maybe, some don't know the Roger Waters story, I just want to stick with the personal for a second longer, because The Wall is almost like a form of memoir. So much of it seems to be, in essence, about the terrible loss you suffered as a baby. Your father was lost in the war. You never really knew him. Also, you hated your school and your educational experience. And I just wonder, even though maybe the pain has gone, whether those experiences shape you.
Well, my father, clearly, I'm so grateful that I carry my father's genes. My father was a wonderful man. He died very young. He was only 30 years old when he died at Anzio in Italy, fighting the Nazis. But he was an extremely interesting man who died absolutely for his principles. He was a conscientious objector at the beginning of the Second World War. And then he worked as an ambulance driver through the Blitz. And he then started doing voluntary work on bomb sites where he met my mother. And together they became interested in politics. I think they probably both joined the Communist Party. Either before or around that time. And he eventually decided that his communism and the need to fight fascism trumped his Christianity. And so, devout though he was, he went back to the conscription board and said, "Excuse me, I've changed my mind, I want to go and fight." And they said, "I say, jolly good, you've got a degree and everything. Officer material, put this chap down as..." And so he did basic training and then officer training, commissioned, boom, and killed.
I mean, what intrigues me is that you have such passion for him. You never knew him, but in a way, the fact of not knowing him maybe has intensified your desire to do something with your life that you believe he would have been proud of.
Well, you're absolutely right. On a gig somewhere in America, we have vets who come at half-time to every show. But at one gig, there was this chap standing there, and he was out of the main circle of people wanting pictures and autographs. And when I went to leave, he stopped me, and he put his hand out. So I took his hand, and I went, "I'm glad you could come, and whatever." And I went to go back to the stage to do the second act. He wouldn't let go of my hand, and I stopped. And he looked me in the eyes, and it's hard for me to tell you this story. And he said, "Your father would be proud of you," to me.
And that meant a lot.
Oh. It wasn't that him saying it meant it. It's just I cannot not be moved, even aged 70, by what my father might have thought of what I do, because in retrospect I admired him so much, and my mother, I have to say.
Well, let's then I mean, that's a very powerful personal motivation, which I can see. Let's now talk about politics. Your dad was political. You mentioned he was a member of the Communist Party for a while. You have become associated with very strong political opinion. The Wall, the show you're still doing, is loaded with political imagery and you could say political comment.
You could. It is. You are correct.
And perhaps the strongest reaction you've got is from people who see some of the imagery, and in particular the imagery on that inflatable pig, which is a central part of the show.
Here we go.
See it as anti-Israeli, and some say anti-Semitic.
Well, this has become an old chestnut now, because this whole question of this particular pig, which appears in the second half of the show, where I am playing the part of a fascist demagogue, or any kind of an extremist demagogue, if you like, is satire. And it's recognized as being that. This record has been out there with the lyrics that are contained in the work, which are part of the narrative, for, as you say, since 1979. So the use of different symbols on the pig, which include the Star of David, the crucifix, crescent and star, the dollar sign, the hammer and sickle, and all kinds of other symbols that I felt were relevant when we were designing the show, have been there on, as part of the show since 2010. I had the accusation of being anti-Semitic leveled at me by the ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, which is an organization in the United States of America, by a man called Abraham Foxman, who is the president of this organization, which purports to be set up to protect Judaism and the Jewish faith and the Jewish people from defamation. Hang on, let me just finish a tack, because this is very important. So I wrote back to him back in 2010 when this whole thing started, and they sent people to see the show, and they made the decision that this was satire and it was not anti-Semitism.
I don't want to spend too long on this, but
neither
just a
do
couple
I, because the show's not about that.
Exactly.
The show is about my desire to break down the walls between peoples, between ethnicities, religions, nationalities, and so on and so forth.
Understood.
That's
so a couple
what
of
the
brief
show
questions,
is
if I may, then we'll definitely move on, because there's a lot more I want to talk about. Just simple questions. The fact that some Jewish people who have seen the show have been upset by it, have found it offensive, has that at any point ever given you pause and ever perhaps prompted you to think about whether you were going to change the way you present the show?
Of course. I think about it every day. Of course it does. Of course. You can't dismiss people's feelings. It's with me the whole time.
But you haven't changed it.
No, because it's like, how could I put it? You cannot join the ostrich society. Let's bury our heads in the sand, pretend that these problems don't exist in the Middle East and have nothing to do. As Elie Wiesel, the American writer who wrote Night, he famously said, and I think it was a wonderful and great thing for him to say, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. He said, the greatest sin of all is to stand by silent and indifferent. And I would suggest that that should be true of any act of oppression or of any predicament that human beings find themselves in anywhere in the world, irrespective of their religion or their race or their nationality.
Okay, if we may leave politics there, because there's a lot I want to talk about connected with the music and Pink Floyd and your solo career. And I want to go back to the beginning in a way. And I'm interested, you just said something, you said, I don't believe I'm always right. And I want to go back to the creative beginnings of Pink Floyd, when you and a bunch of friends, fellow students, got together in the mid-60s and founded the band Pink Floyd. When you look back on those early years now and the way that you related to the other members of the band, and we'll talk about them, do you think you got some things wrong in the way you handled relationships and the band?
Well, I don't think you're talking about the early years, because the very early years were like 64, 65, 66. Then we turned pro in 67. And
then there was the crucial moment when Sid Barrett, your friend,
got ill, yeah,
and he left the band in 68.
Yes, that's
and
true.
That was the first big
and Dave
difficulty.
joined the band, yeah, and And it was very difficult after that because Sid was absolutely the core of everything when Pink Floyd first started its professional career, because he wrote 90% of the songs. I think I wrote one song on the first album, maybe two. But basically, you know, it was in his hands until he
You've
got
described him as the visionary, but
Yeah.
was it drugs that destroyed Sid Barrett as a member of Pink Floyd? And if it was, how close did drugs come in that era of acid and psychedelia to actually destroying the band?
Well, my personal belief is that drugs, you know, LSD was not solely responsible for Sid's illness. It felt to me at the time that Sid was kind of drifting off the rails, and when you're drifting off the rails, the worst thing you can do is start messing around with hallucinogenics. There is no question but that LSD, and he did take quite a lot of it, I believe. I wasn't living with him at the time.
But I just wonder whether you, David Gilmour and others were on the same path at the time. Not at all.
Nothing, no, not even. I took LSD once in my life, and it was amazing, but I thought, wow, I don't want to do that again. Not because it was horrific, but just because that's a choice you make. You either go down that path or you don't. But it definitely exacerbated the symptoms that, loosely strung together, you and I might call schizophrenia. He heard voices, he became incommunicative, he turned into a different person. They were black holes in the sky, you know. It was.
I mean, the remarkable thing is that it clearly affected you and the band deeply, but after his departure, you know, you created music that will live as long as rock and roll lives. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon still is one of the most popular albums to download in the world. And another interesting thing you've said about that is that was, in essence, the moment when you felt the band had achieved what it was set out to achieve, what you all set out to achieve. And from then on, you said, we clung together more out of fear than hope.
Right. Well, that's my opinion.
So was it all a downward slide from Dark Side of the Moon?
Well, no, of course not. Because if you look at what we did together, uncomfortable as it was to be in that relationship where we were no longer four guys in a garage, but basically we were a real group, four guys driven by the ambition of making it. With Dark Side of the Moon, we made it, and those ambitions ceased to be quite as important as they were. And so the cracks which led to the eventual schism in 1983 or whenever it was, were there all through the making of Wish You Were Here and Animals. And The War, and certainly the final.
I mean, that is very honest, but it's leaving me thinking, what kind of life can it have been for more than a decade, creating with these guys, living side by side with them, and let's be honest, particularly maybe David Gilmour more than anybody, living side by side, working together, and actually rubbing each other up the wrong way, having a deteriorating relationship, and, excuse my language, pissing each other off. I mean, it must have been a very weird life.
Well, we didn't live side by side. You know, outside of working hours, we never saw each other.
Really?
No.
Because what, you couldn't stand the sight of each other after a while?
No, we could stand the sight of each other because, you know, in fact, as became increasingly clear as the years went by, we didn't have all that much in common. But we did work well together. I mean, the work that we did together through, in spite of the fact, you know, that we're not blood brothers, was remarkable. And,
well, it was remarkable.
We both made great contributions to it,
well,
as did
that's
Rick and as did Nick.
With respect, over years since, you have talked about the fact that, you know, you felt the songwriting, frankly, was more and more being yours, you know, that you felt they weren't contributing very much. And there was, I think, toward the end...
It wasn't something I felt. Those are the facts.
Right, and toward the end, I mean, David Gilmour said that at certain sessions and recording moments, he felt almost there wasn't any point turning up because you were so controlling.
You are such a stirrer. I'm not going there. That's it. I'm not going any further. We had a great career together. It was fantastic. I look back upon it with huge pride, or but with a great feeling that wow, and almost of surprise that we managed somehow to create this great work. And I'm not going to apportion plaudits or blame to anybody.
But sorry to interrupt, because this is so interesting for so many people around the world who know the band and know the story of the band and all the rancor that came out in '85 when you walked away, and then there was I think 2 years of legal battles because you didn't want the Pink Floyd name and the Pink Floyd act to continue. You felt that was wrong, given that you'd walked away from the band.
I did think that was wrong, and I was wrong.
Were you?
Of course I was. Who cares? It was a commercial decision. And in fact, it's one of the few times that the legal profession has taught me something. Because when I went to these chaps and said, listen, this isn't Pink Floyd anymore. They went, well, what do you mean? That's irrelevant. It is a label and it has commercial value. You can't say it can cease to exist. You obviously haven't looked back to Runnymede, and you obviously don't understand English jurisprudence. It's not about what you think it's about, it's what it is. Which brings me to, sorry to go on, but the law is everything that we have. That's what the wall is about. The wall is about the law. The wall is about 1789, the wall is about 1776, the wall is about 1948, the wall is about human rights. And it's about our declaration.
I got you.
Sorry.
But I'll tell you what, the wall's also about you. And I suppose what I'm still fishing for is an explanation or some sort of description of how and why you really changed after the rancor of the mid-'80s. Because I'll just read you something you said about that period. You said, I was frightened, defensive, embarrassed, sexually insecure, and that's why I was snotty and aggressive. Well, that was the old you. And, in the years that came after, you found a way back to relationships with the members of the band, and in 2005, you even played that famous gig together for Live 8, where Pink Floyd came together again. So what happened?
Well, where to start? Obviously, after our schism, and when Dave and Nick and Rick went off and played all over the world, and I was sort of stooging around with my different bands that I put together, and I made a couple of solo albums and toured them. It was very, very difficult because nobody had any idea who I was, and they weren't really interested.
Well, they certainly knew who you were, but
they didn't.
They weren't. The critics at the time weren't really liking your solo material.
Well, that may well be true as well, but the fact is that Joe Public would respond to anything, that was called Pink Floyd, in a way that they would never respond to anything that wasn't. And people might say...
How frustrating was that for you?
It was very character forming, Well, there's a famous occasion when I was in Cincinnati and I was playing in like a 3,000 or 4,000 capacity arena to about 1,000 people. And the very next day, the chaps were playing to a sold-out show, 70,000 people in the Colts football stadium.
You mean the chaps being Pink Floyd?
Yeah, and I remember at the time...
God, that must have hurt.
No, I remember at the time standing on stage and thinking to myself, you know what? This is character forming. This is not the worst thing in the world. Who was it? It was Young who was always saying, I'm really worried about so-and-so. He's just suffered a great success, I think. I'm not saying that Young has got the answer to everything, but nevertheless, he was a wise old bird in some ways. And so I don't think there's anything, wrong with a little bit of humbling.
And again, you talked about being wrong in terms of the lawsuits against the band in the mid-'80s. Looking back, do you think there is some truth in the caricature of you as being a control freak, domineering, and just trying too much, too often to drive the band exactly where you wanted it to go?
Yes. Yes and no. I may have been domineering, but you either have ideas or you don't. And if you do have ideas, you can't be expected to sit on them like that, just because somebody else isn't having ideas. So that's why it was the correct thing for us to split up, or for me to leave, if you like, so that I could express my ideas unfettered. And my ideas are still, I've had a few breakthroughs recently, which I won't talk about, but I am going to make another record. I've had a very, very strong idea, and I shall pursue it. I will make at least one more record, and I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth stuck into it. But I couldn't be doing that if I had somebody looking over my shoulder going, oh, I don't think that's very good. Well, do something yourself then. Well, I might need a few years before I actually write a song.
How frustrating has it been, and maybe still is, that the rock industry is so obsessed with reunions and reworking the past that I dare say pretty much every week since you walked out of Pink Floyd, and despite the mini reunion over Live Aid, you still constantly get asked.
No, I don't. People have finally realised that they're flogging a dead horse.
Do you think they really have?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell you why, because people very, very rarely bring it up with me at all. And
is there no part of you which looks at, Jagger and the Stones, looks at David Bowie, looks at all these...
Well, Bowie hasn't toured for years and years and years, but anyway.
Well, he's released an album which is now getting huge plaudits. And I just wonder whether you sometimes look at that and you think, you know what, Pink Floyd could still produce new music.
It's so weird that you should be asking me this question, because normally you're really intelligent and you ask proper questions, about proper things. Yeah. Why would the reasons for me leaving in 1985 not pertain now? How long? 30 years later?
Because you've changed.
But the situation hasn't changed, and I haven't changed at all. And you're exactly right when you say that I like to be in charge of my own destiny, and I like to pursue though, having said that, I like to work with other people who are creative. It's one of the great pleasures of it's not like being a painter,
A final question then, and this is about you as an artist and your motivation. I just wonder, do you have to believe that your best work is still to come? Or is there a part of you that acknowledges that the work that will define you and maybe that you're proudest of happened a long time ago?
That's a good question. The third album that I made on my own, which was called Amused to Death, in my view, has never received the attention it deserves.
In your view, is that up there at the same level of artistic achievement as Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall?
Yes. And it surpasses Wish You Were Here or Animals or any of the other work that we did by quite a large margin. However, to answer the question, I am as excited about what I'm going to do when this tour's finished as I am about either of those works or Dark Side of the Moon.
We're going to have to end there, but Roger Waters, thank you very much
Not at all.
for being on Hardtalk.
Pleasure. Thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
Hello and a very happy new year from everybody at BBC Weather. I only wish I had better weather news. It may be a new year, but we have the same weather, and that means more wind and rain in the forecast. This is the big picture then for the first part of New Year's Day. Another area of low pressure feeding in more heavy rain and strengthening winds, and all of it spreading north and east during the day. So for some of us, it will be a very miserable day, and I'm afraid there is enough rain in the forecast to bring a further risk of flooding, particularly in those areas that have seen flooding recently where the ground is saturated. Let's take a look at things at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at this stage, just just a few showers pushing their way across Scotland, but many places will start the day dry. And the further north you are in Scotland, you'll hang on to dry weather until quite late in the day. But those easterly winds ahead of the rain coming in will make it feel quite chilly. We begin the day with temperatures close to freezing. A largely dry start after the overnight showers across eastern parts of England. But here comes the rain into southwest England, south and west Wales, and the bright colours on the rainfall picture, an indication of the intensity of that rain. Not just rain, but strong gusty winds as well. But the greatest concern where Met Office weather warnings are in force, where the ground is saturated, 20 to 30 millimetres of rain, an inch or more, southern England, South Wales, parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. So again, the concern is that we could just exacerbate the flooding problems we've had recently, bring new problems in as well. So pay close attention to any flood warnings issued during the day, and of course the very latest forecast through the day. Those strong winds with further showers continue overnight and into Thursday. Gusty winds 40, 50 miles an hour or maybe more exposed coasts, but they all push through those showers to start Thursday. A few more coming into the north and west during the day, but many eastern areas holding on to some dry weather. Probably one of the better days we've had for quite some time and to come as well, because by Friday evening into the weekend, naturally, it is more of the same. The wind picking up again, further spells of rain, all bringing a risk of flooding. Another area of low pressure then sweeping rain through on Thursday night and into Friday, and the winds remain very strong behind that. Gales or severe gales, potentially perhaps in a few places, storm force winds combined with high tides to western and southern areas brings a risk of rough seas and some coastal flooding as well on Friday. So again, pay close attention to the latest forecast as we go through the rest of the week. And if you are travelling, well, the risk of disruption continues. Stay in touch with your BBC local radio station and BBC Travel Online anytime.
Delays are occurring on route today.
Did you know that with the BBC iPlayer app, you can download TV shows straight onto your phone or tablet and take them with you? Which is sure to put a smile on your face. Say goodbye to boring journeys and download your favourite BBC programmes. BBC iPlayer, making the unmissable even more unmissable.
Hello and welcome, and you join us as we watch live pictures from New York's Times Square. They're just about to welcome in the new year there. The New Year's Eve ball just about to start its big moment there in Times Square, descending a 130-foot pole to mark the stroke of midnight. The countdown to pressing the button to start the ball just underway. Unusually, no mayor of New York involved in this year. First time in a decade there's been no mayor of New York on this. Instead, US Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, New York City native, leading the countdown and pushing the ceremonial button. The outgoing mayor is sitting it out with his family and friends. The mayor-elect is just being sworn in a private ceremony at his home in Brooklyn. Officially a new year in New York. About 1 million people packed into that area of Midtown Manhattan, shaped like a bow tie just around Times Square. And as the clock strikes 12 and that glittering ball dropped, so did a ton of confetti. That sphere, incidentally, weighing about 12,000 pounds, nearly 12,000 pounds, and covered in more than 2,500 triangles of Waterford crystal. Well, a very happy new year to you, wherever you are in the world. Celebrations will be taking place around the globe, of course. One of the latest in Brazil. There were spectacular firework displays to welcome 2014 in Paris, in Dubai, in Beijing, and here in London, where the fireworks came packed with edible confetti. In Edinburgh, 80,000 people converged around the city's castle for the first of several nights of partying. Here's Wendy Urquhart. And just a warning, her report, perhaps not surprisingly, contains flashing images.
This is Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro, where 21 ferries full of fireworks put on a magnificent show of colour for Brazilians. In the UK, this incredible display blasted out of the London Eye and over the River Thames. New Year's Eve, or Hogmanay as it's known in Scotland, is a very special night, and Edinburgh lived up to the hype with a barrage of fireworks over the city's castle. But one of the first places to see in the new year was Auckland, New Zealand, with fireworks erupting from the city's Sky Tower. In Australia, 1 million people crammed into Sydney Harbour for the dawn of 2014 and a fabulous display over the Opera House. 2 hours later, monks rang a bell in Tokyo to mark the new year and pray for health and happiness in 2014. In Hong Kong, this display over the city's famous Victoria Harbour was watched by thousands. The fireworks were launched near the Kowloon Peninsula and from the top of skyscrapers on Hong Kong Island. The Great Wall of China was the focus of celebrations in Beijing, as people gathered for a light show at one of the best preserved parts of the wall. Dubai rang in the new year with more than 400,000 fireworks. The city hopes this spectacular display will bag a world record. There's only one word to describe the fireworks in Moscow's Red Square, and that's awesome. A fitting start to the year that will see Russia host the Winter Olympics. Berlin's Brandenburg Gate was packed out with revellers well before midnight, every one of them eager to see in the new year with this blaze of glory. And there's a lot more to come as the world welcomes in a brand new year. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
And in the spirit of New Year, let's take you back to those live pictures from New York's Times Square. It's officially 2014 in New York. So we've seen the ball drop, the famous ball drop, and the first time, as we were saying, in a decade, no mayor of New York at these festivities. I think you can just see on this stage there the US Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who is a New York City native, who led the final 60-second countdown and pushed the button to signal the ball drop. The outgoing mayor, as we were saying, Michael Bloomberg, who's been there for every other celebration of this kind during his tenure, is in fact sitting it out with his family and friends. And the mayor-elect, Bill de Blasio, being sworn into office just about now in a private ceremony at his home in Brooklyn. There'll be a full inauguration at noon at City Hall. As the ball dropped, a ton of confetti also came with it. That means, of course, working through the night just a little later to rid this area of about 50 tons of confetti. Sanitation crews be working through the night, getting rid of all the reminders of this revelry.
Sweet America, you know, God done shed his grace on thee.
Back to other news with a bump from today. Romanians and Bulgarians can work without restrictions across the European Union. Transitional controls were imposed on the two countries when they joined the EU in 2007. Member states such as Britain only allowed workers in some fields. The lifting of these measures has prompted fears of mass migration from the bloc's poorest countries. From the Romanian capital, Bucharest, Mark Lowen reports.
It's icy in Bucharest, but the new year will warm hearts here. From today, Romanians and Bulgarians can work freely in any EU country. Temporary controls have been lifted. Some added festive cheer for Albert Dumitrescu, a security guard keen to leave for the UK.
I want to go to work, to make a better life, and to raise money for my kids, for my family. And after that, I'm coming back. I don't stay there.
But some advice from one who's been and returned, that life in Britain is tougher than it looks.
There might be a slightly romantic view of working and living in Britain. Some people may think of it as an El Dorado of Europe.
Was it an El Dorado for you?
It wasn't an El Dorado for me. It was certainly good, I can't complain, but I did take the decision to come back.
9 EU countries placed restrictions on Romania and Bulgaria, the bloc's poorest members. Now the worry is that some here will migrate to claim social benefits. Fears in Britain of a mass exodus from here come from a decade ago, when the UK estimated that 15,000 people a year would arrive from Eastern Europe. But in fact, finally, it's thought that 1.5 million actually came. This time, though, it's different. Back then, just 3 countries lifted the restrictions. Now every EU state has its doors open. And many Romanians and Bulgarians who wanted to leave have already done so, since they joined the European Union 7 years ago. At Bucharest airport, there's no expectation of a rush. Officials here say the story has been overplayed with dangerous rhetoric.
Many politicians in Great Britain use this topic to gain votes. And they go that far that they instigate to xenophobia and racism.
One coach company, though, has tripled its services to London, but others say they don't expect a big increase in demand. I'll go to Britain, he says. It's a better standard of living. Here I can't support my family. I would never leave my country, this woman says. For what? I'm a patriot. Celebrations went long into the night for a new year and new perspectives. Nobody knows how many will leave, but Romanians are just glad to be treated as equals, and that is one cause for a party. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Bucharest.
The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has spoken publicly for the first time about the execution of his uncle, who held a key role in his government. In a New Year broadcast, Chang Sang-taek was described as scum, and his removal is said to have strengthened the ruling Korean Workers' Party. Mr. Chang was also accused of trying to build his own power base in North Korea. Barbara Bush, wife of former US President George H.W. Bush, has been taken to hospital in Houston, Texas. She's 88. The former First Lady is suffering from the early signs of pneumonia, but is said to be in good spirits. She's also, of course, the mother of former President George W. Bush and known for her work in promoting literacy. People in Buenos Aires are still burning rubbish on the streets in protest at power and water cuts, just at the time they're enduring one of the worst heat waves in 40 years. People are hoping the rain that's forecast will actually fall to cool temperatures over the next few days. The rebel leader in South Sudan, Riek Machar, has agreed to peace talks with the government just hours after his forces attacked the strategically important town of Bor. The negotiations are due to happen in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. But in the world's newest state, there is still no end in sight to the fighting. It's killed at least 1,000 people in the past 2 weeks.